Hey there guys, and welcome back. So we are on session 3 of the LiteLike development not blog. So here are my times. I discussed in a previous stream why there was this big old gap in here. Again, not going to fill up actual code review streams with that information. Going to try to keep this as straightforward as possible. So let's hop over to the GitHubs. Here's GitHub. And here's the changes. So as you can see, I added a couple files here, and then obviously we continue to work on combat. So I'm going to start, I guess, with the combat changes. So let's hop over to Visual Studio Code. Now that we see what we're looking at, where we're going with this. And VS Code. There we go. And combat. Now, I'm going to move my window over so that I can double check because it's been a few days since I've made a lot of these changes. So, loop rate. One of these things, this is our frame rate. This is how often the combat loop is going to run. Before we had just a combat stack, I implemented combat loop here. The other thing I did was I added, it looks like, okay, this stuff. So player queue, obviously, I had been talking about how we'd have player actions here. So this is just the queue to move actions from the combat loop. Combat loop gathers the player actions and sends them over to the combat stack. And then I also moved this section of code right here. It's one of these things. This is the AI. This is the computer AI. This never really made sense in the combat stack. It's just I wanted to get it down, and therefore I put it in the combat stack for the time being. That really should happen outside of resolving the action taking in combat. So that makes sense to be over there. The next thing we got is, let's see. This right here, player distance. Basically, I was thinking about the animation, and the way animation works in a dark room for combat is your character just kind of juts forward or it shoots a bullet out. Now again, we are assuming our characters are not moving at hypersonic speed, therefore we're not going to see the bullet animation really as in animation. There will probably be some kind of special effect on the screen for half a second, but again, we're dealing with lasers at this point because we're mechs, so it's not going to be as long-lived. I was thinking about having whether or not the character is attacking with a melee weapon or a ranged weapon be determined by where it is at on the screen. So that's why I've got these in here. So we're presuming ranged off the front, off the top. But, you know, basically what happens, how I'm imagining this happen, is let's say I have an axe. I have this big old space axe, right? And I'm attacking with it. Well, I don't really want the character going all the way forwards and backwards each time I attack with it. I kind of want to visualize on screen the character just being there and wailing away with it, making little movements instead of, let's say, 100 pixel movements from the back of his block, his div where he's hanging out, to the front of his div to symbolize the attack. I'd rather him be at the front and then just move, let's say, 10 pixels forward on each attack for the attack animation. And then when he switches to range, then have him drop back. And then we have room, we have extra room for the laser animation. So that's the reason I threw these in here. Not something that's going to come up immediately for a little bit. Again, we got to get the whole entire screen setup done before that really comes into effect. But I wanted to at least get it down before I forgot about it. Let's see, what next? Looks like I did something in here. Action type. Oh, okay. So because this is player action, and I had it labeled as player action to begin with, I didn't have, or I guess what this should change to, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, is character action, but I made this so that the computer, the enemy AI, also gets player actions, which again, this probably should change to character action at this point, just for clarification purposes. But basically I made it so that we can indicate who is the activator and who's the action type, just like we have activator and opponent, activator and opponent action type and object were already on there in the previous iteration. So now we have activator and opponent up here, to match this. So now both the player and the AI will use the same exact action format, and then we can handle that exactly the same down here. So you can see how this is player actions and enemy actions all in the same loop. So now we're able to say for any given action, regardless of where it's coming from, regardless of its source, we can handle that with the same exact code. So that is that change right there. Let us look now, seeing, whoops, sorry about that. I thought I was on the other tab. Let's see, got that covered. I talked about that. Let's see. One rather important thing here. I'm used to Max. I do a lot of programming in Python, so I forgot Max is not actually a function in vanilla JavaScript, math.max. So that's a rather important change. And also, you will see that this is action.opponent.statistics, weapon, action.opponent.armor, etc. As opposed to previously, it looks like I had it as just target. So, back to changing this from weapon activator target is what this was before. Now we have it as just action, and then we pull the stuff we need out of the action. So that is that. Let's see, next change on the GitHubs. Something down here. What did I change down here? Oh, back to, okay, that's what I changed. Handle item. This is now an action instead of an item activator and opponent. Was the parameters here before. Now it's just action, and we just pull everything we need out of that. And that is all the changes to combat. Okay, next stupid thing that I forgot, because again, I don't program enough in JavaScript, is back to modules. So we will notice if we come, alright, because I haven't used it yet, it hasn't happened in here, but let's hop over to character export. I wasn't exporting anything, so even though I kept on calling import star from whatever, I think utils was the only thing I was exporting from. Yeah, utils was the only thing I was exporting from. I actually already had these exports in here before. Everything else I forgot to actually include the exports for, so now we're exporting roles because roles is something that other classes are going to need access to. We're exporting character because obviously other classes need to have the character object. So that was a rather silly change that I forgot to, or rather silly thing that I forgot to do, and we have now fixed that. Back with combat, back to this, where is it at? There we go. Weapon ranges right here. Okay, I did not actually import that, so that is going to be a mistake that fails at this point. But we'll fix that. Over here in equipment, I added in weapon ranges. So there we go. And obviously exported stuff as previously discussed. So now things have ranges, and what else do we have in equipment? Weapons obviously got a range now. That is a change. Did the exports, and it looks like that's everything for equipment. Just adding in exports and the ranges. On to the next thing. I'm going to skip game for right now. Utils. I guess utils I will talk about with I/O. So is there anything else that I want to get done before? No, I guess not. All right, so we're on to the I/O stuff now, which is a bit substantial. That's the stuff I did yesterday. So we need to get information into this game, and I didn't particularly want to hard code it. I'd much prefer to have files like this so that we can just update a file, and it makes things easier to customize, in my opinion. So rather than hard coding all the armor and the items and whatnot, I wanted to have something like this. Now that requires two things. First off, normally with Python, I'd be able to take this and then just do item type item, where item is a JSON, right? Where item is a dictionary in Python, but it's a object, this object right here. I'd be able to do that in Python. I wasn't sure how to do it in in JavaScript, but evidently this is how. So we have this instance from JSON, and once again I forgot to copy the Stack Overflow, so I'll have to go back and find that. Again, stolen off Stack Overflow because I wasn't sure how related to do it, but we've got, and I probably should add more notes here, one of those things. This was actually, I wrote this one really quick at the very end of the first half of the session, which was one of the days where I was not feeling great because of allergies. So I was just banging it out really quick and therefore did not properly annotate it. But basically, the object.create class prototype, so that's going to create a new object. And then this assign is going to assign the JSON to the object. Now, I don't think this works exactly how I think it's going to work, but I haven't had any errors yet, and I've used it a little bit. So as far as I'm aware, it's working. So that is that. That is the function we're going to use to take JSON files like this and turn them into instances. So now we can come over here to IO, and you can see that I've written a whole bunch of stuff. And this is actually where, whoops, sorry. I started realizing that things were broken because I was trying to call equip.weapon type and equip.armor, etc. And I went, oh, wait a second. It's not actually exporting. We can't actually get to it in equipped. So that's when I had to go back and add the exports. So this is a brand new file. I can just run straight over this as is. Whoops. Obviously, we got to get the actual JSON file. Now, one of these deals, require is a thing, but I've never actually used it before. I've only ever used fetch, so we're using fetch here. I have not actually used Node or any offline packages like that. So one of these deals where I'm not going to go outside of my comfort zone at the moment because we're trying to make a simple game. So we're just going to fetch the equipment JSON from the server is how this is going to work. And then once we get that from the server, then we get the JSON version, and then we parse the JSON version. That's what all that is. And we are returning this promise from fetch so that whatever function calls this load equipment function gets the promise, and then once the promise is fulfilled, then it can use then and parse the information, do whatever it wants with the information. So as you can see in here, we set up our weapons, armor, and items, which are the things in equipment, to give ourselves a place to put them. And then for weapon in data.weapon, data being this whole entire file, and then weapon being this, right here, this key value pair inside of the JSON file. Weapons.push instance from JSON, equip.weapon type. That is the base weapon type. This is not an instance. So, well, it's an instance of the weapon type class. It is not what we're considering a weapon instance, which is the actual, this weapon has, specific statistics or whatnot. It has a specific ID, whatnot. So we go ahead and just call that instance from JSON. I explained to you how that works, and we just pass it the weapon type so that it knows what class to make, and the JSON object to interpret. Same thing with armor. One of these funny things, make sure you don't put armor right here because armor is already defined right here. That's not a problem with weapons or items because in English they have S's on the end. We do not say armors. At least most of us do not say armors. So if you do armor.push and then use armor right here for armor in data.armors, that is going to break. Yes, I did that initially and then went, oh, derp. And then with item. So item gets a little funny, and now we get to jump out of here and go over to the other new file, which is callbacks. So if we look at our equipment.json, You cannot define functions inside of JSON. At least you should not do that. You should not do that. It's one of those things. In theory, programming languages have an eval function, which will take some random text and turn it into actual code. That is generally very much frowned upon. You probably should not do that. So to avoid doing that, I create callbacks. I am creating callbacks, and those will correspond here. So this is heal, right? This item right here has a heal effect as a callback, and heal down here is inside of the callbacks object, which is kind of an enumerated object. I'm saying that just because it functions like our other enumerations. We're going to be able to call callbacks.heal or brackets heal in this case in order to reference it through callback. And as you can see here, I made this a factory. So basically, the heal is going to want to know how it's going to work here. So it's going to need some information. It's going to need some arguments. And those arguments are what are the target and what is the value that I'm going to be healing. Because in theory, you could be targeting your opponent if you wanted to. Again, in our game, that's an unrealistic instance, expectation, in opponent or in ally, I should say. I should have clarified that. So in theory, there could be multiple characters you might want to heal. So that's why I set it up as just this generic heal target for value function. But our combat callbacks, right over here, get activator and opponent, right? So if the combat callback is only going to get activator and opponent, we can't really pass heal to the combat callback. So instead, we create a new function here, which accepts activator and opponent. And based on equipment.json, you can see that activator is our target. These are the arguments that get put into this callback function factory. So the activator will be the target and 45 will be the heal amount. So once we get in here, you'll see that this function we are returning, this is an arrow function that we're returning. Just one of those things, just a slimmer version of the actual function. We have character as activator to start off with, and then if target happens to be opponent, then we swap it. Again, for any other function, if our game got more complex, then we'd have to change how all this goes, because all of a sudden it wouldn't be activator and opponent, it'd be activator and target is how we'd have to do this. And in which case this target value would actually just be target, so this would change. However, for the time being, we're assuming that anytime you use the heal spell, it just defaults to activator. And I'm just throwing this extra line of code right in here just in case I decide to create a heal that heals the enemy. It's a silly thing, but I throw it in there just in case. And then you can see down here, this is where value gets used. So we take math.min, the player's HP, which is max HP, and then its current HP plus value. So if max HP is 50, you're currently at 50, and then you add 45, that gets you to 95, and then we take the minimum of that, which would be the 50 max HP. And obviously character.statistics.hp, oh shoot, that should be current HP. Derp. Current HP. There we go. That ends up being the ends up being your current HP. So that is how combats work. So we'll create a whole entire library here of factory functions that can take a generic, can have some setup to it. Again, this is only real meaningful setup on this one, but you can set it up to have an effect, and therefore we can vary the effect inside of the equipment.json so that things with similar effects can just be defined once, and then they're customized per the JSON and added to the item inside of this IO function. So as we can see here, for item in data.items, callback is item.cb. Sorry, I said that backwards, but you understand. CB is item.callback. The args is items.arguments. And then I don't know that we necessarily need to do this, but I'm deleting item.arguments from the object, from this item object, because we're going to eventually pass that item object to instance from JSON. So I don't particularly want those sitting around. Again, may not be necessary, but doing it just in case. And then we overwrite item.callback by going into the callbacks, which is this guy right here, this object right here. So callbacks, and then like I said, brackets. So it's going to be callbacks heal in our example, and then passing it the factory, the heal factories, the arguments right here. So activator and 45 get passed into targeted value, and it will return this function right here, which takes activator and opponent and then heals the character that whichever one it got set up as. So that is that. And then obviously it gets pushed onto the item stack, and then we return everything. Easy peasy. A little convoluted, but easy peasy. So now we can just have a dictionary of items in the world, and we can do this with other things too, but for our purposes at the moment, we have a whole entire JSON file of everything that can be defined, and that is that. Now, the next thing, you'll notice how in weapon type, and let's hop over to equipment.js. So in weapon type and all this, I just have an ID. I don't have a name or anything like that. This does not matter. Where is the next one? Armor, just ID, no name. Just ID, no name in item type. My thought process there was this whole entire strings folder, which I kind of vaguely mentioned in a previous stream. But basically, in IO, we can load up a dictionary given the language. Right now I just have English because, and that dictionary, that JSON file, will have all the available names and everything in there. So if we change language, all we have to do is change our language JSON file to a different language, and in theory the game should be able to pick everything up. Now right now I am breaking it down into weapons, armor, item. This is only for ease of interface with this over here. So because weapons, armor, and item are separate files right now, or separate objects inside of the JSON file, it makes it easy for me. So weapon 0 comes over here and maps to weapon 0 in the English file, and I should have another one for weapon 2, but one of those things only going to get just so much done in a 2-hour period. So you can see how, in theory, if we ever need to print out, if we ever need to put onto the screen, we just go to our language dict, our language object rather, because it's JavaScript, so our language object, and then look up the ID of the equipment, other equipment.js. There we go. So we just look up. So if we know it's a weapon, right? We know it's a weapon type. Then we take this ID and look that up in. All right, keep open. This is what's happening here. That is why I keep on losing it. There we go. So we look up weapon and ID 0 right here. Now, it may be useful to just have everything as a flat index. The reason I am not, as previously stated, is because this is all broken up here. But if I broke this all down and just had this as a list of all equipment, and in that case I would do this. I would say type weapon. So I do this instead, and then the IO function over here would take this whole entire list, which again is a flat list. Imagine this is a flat list right now, and it would parse those out into weapons, items, and armors based on what this type is, as opposed to based on what this key is. So that is an alternative, and the value in doing that is that we just have flat lists. We don't have to actually go looking for stuff. So for example, for anything that's a weapon, item, or armor, I can literally just come in here, grab the language object and say language object 0, and that would be the battle axe. language object 2. That would be the basic armor, because in theory, over here, I have another weapon right here, which I did not declare. So that would be the value there. In doing that, it makes it a little bit simpler to reference. It makes things more streamlined. However, it makes things more streamlined. It saves us on a bit of code too, which is not, unreasonable. However, I feel like it could get more confusing than it already can get. So right now, if I add more items, if for whatever reason I do something stupid and add another item instead of another weapon, instead of down here, if I instead, because I'm being stupid, add it up here, that will screw everything up everywhere, basically. So that will screw this up, that will screw the other stuff up. Now that will still happen in our situation, like the way we have it set up right now, that will happen, but it will happen worse in the other situation, and when this is a flat list, because that would also throw off armor and items. That would throw off all 3 categories instead of just the rest of the weapons after this point. So we're kind of minimizing the damage here by doing it this way. However, it's one of those things that should never happen to begin with. So, one of these deals is kind of hard to justify. It's kind of hard to say, well, you're minimizing damage, but you should have never done that in the first place. One of those things. Is not a great argument. However, it is an argument in my opinion, so yeah, of course I saved it after doing all that instead of just doing that. Alright, whichever. So that is that. That is my rationale on the language dict and why it's, instead of just a straight index of entities in the world, which again would make sense, it just makes it harder to maintain. I guess that's the other thing. The other thing is that when I'm looking for a weapon, I have to actually dig through this object, if this is a flat object, instead of going directly to weapons. So let's say we have 100 weapons and I want to find an armor. There's another option. So if I have 50 weapons and then 25 armor and then 50 more weapons and then 10 items and then a few more armors and then 30 more items, you can understand how trying to track down what I'm looking for could be a bit more difficult. So this is easier to maintain right here, like this, by having separated by item type. So there's the other argument for having it as categories instead of a flat list. Again, a flat list definitely does have its benefits, which is why I am talking so much about it, why I keep on trying to justify it. But I think those benefits are outweighed by maintainability, in my opinion. So that is that. And let's see, other changes. I guess we're just on to the stuff that I was hoping, I keep on saying that I want to get at least a little bit of a demo up, and I'm pretty sure that's where we're at right now, is the work I did really quick in the last 15 minutes, something like that, of the last 1 hour session I did. Yeah, I think that's all we are at right now. Oh, never mind, I take it back. We sidebarred really quick just to finish this off. So load strings, very simply. We got a index of valid languages here. We make sure that the language passed into the load strings is a valid language. Otherwise, we throw an error. And then we go and fetch and return the JSON. Very simple, very straightforward. And now we can hop over to game. It's game and LiteLike, but regardless. So, before, this was the only part inside a game. So I started adding all this stuff, which are constants for the game state. Okay, so as you can see, language, English, strings is null. And then we load the strings. This dot language, and I forgot this should be dot then result. This dot strings equals result. There we go. So then we load the loaded strings from the JSON into our strings file, and we'll be able to access those to display on screen. Equipment does the same exact thing. We go ahead and let me go ahead and just toss that there. There we go. Load the equipment, get the result from load equipment, and then add that to, or set our equipment as that. Easy peasy. And then player map and combat I haven't done anything with. Again, I set up this really quick run demo here, but I obviously, as you can see here, did not get anywhere near finishing it. And I did sidebar really quick because we need a character, at least one character. So I made a starting character right here. So the character, ID 0. So these IDs for characters, I'm not actually sure what I'm doing with, to be perfectly frank. That may end up referencing like inside of the string files, for example. It may be character 0 is player, character 1 is bandit, character 2 is space monster, you know. That may be what that ends up being. I'm not entirely 100% sure what I'm doing with the IDs there, but that is definitely a possibility. Otherwise, the player character gets obviously a character role because it is a character, and the player role. Right now, I have inside of where is it at? It looks like we did not keep it open. Inside of roles, we have character and item. I don't know what my rationale was for having item in here. I honestly do not know. I think I was maybe considering items, maybe having some automaton or something like that. Maybe might have been my idea, but I don't know why item is in here. So the other thing is that right now, character as a role doesn't necessarily make sense since characters are the only things that have roles. So again, a couple design decisions that I do not recall why I put them in. I'm going to keep them until I decide that I haven't done anything with them, which is basically when the game launches. And I shouldn't say launches, but when the game gets into a alpha playable state. You know, at that point I may take that out. But regardless, starting HP, current HP. It's one of these deals where, right? So I have this design argument, which is that numbers should be smaller. Human beings, for some reason, hate that idea. I don't know why. And for some reason, so basically, my argument back in the day was, I am playing StarCraft. And StarCraft is this big old space epic with giant monsters and machines and tanks and crap. And my numbers are still like 20 damage. You know, my damage on a battlecruiser is like 20 damage, okay? And then you look at WoW, which is made by the same exact company, World of Warcraft, and a little tiny human, you know, this is not some giant space mech, this is not some cosmic aberration, but this tiny little human has 5,000 HP and deals 50,000 damage per attack. You know, it's like the ballooning of statistics is frankly kind of ridiculous in games to me. I find that very unattractive, which is why I never played WoW. I played a different MMO. But my personal opinion is that HP statistics should be lower. Now, obviously, compared to, if you're paying attention, you should recognize that compared to this 45, that is a bit low, like very low. One of these deals. It's just a matter of game balance. I'll just figure out where exactly I want the midpoint to be for a starting character, how much leeway we want, because if you look at inside equipment, I got damage 1, damage 2 here, so this 45 is like a majillion hits, right? So this damage 1 and 2 obviously lines up a lot better with this HP 5 and HP, HP 5, just HP 5. So that makes sense. And then starting loadout is basic armor and the battle axe. So we got that going. That's what we set up. And you'll see here, this is a reference to Fightbox. That's just a little div I added over here, just for the time being, just to start putting a demo together. And obviously right here, get start game button, added that in so that we can just run the demo. So that was the start of what I put together for creating a demo, but obviously only have just so much time in a 2-hour period and did not get the demo done. So that will be the plan for the next stream. The next stream I should hopefully have maybe not a full fight demo, like not with animations and whatnot, but at the very least something that outputs player attacks, enemy attacks, player attacks, etc., 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 just as text on the screen, easy peasy. At least that way we can see that the game engine itself is running. Whether or not I also include player input or whether or not I hard code player input in just as the demo is still up in the air. It depends what I get to. So that has been the entirety of what I've gotten done in 2 hours. Again, the first hour here, that was a day that I was more or less dead, so did not get as much done there as I wanted to, but definitely made up for it over here. And we did manage to take this to the full half hour, which is what I was hoping for. I was hoping for half an hour recaps on the code. So far, I'm pretty sure we've done that for most of these. The first session I recall being a little bit short, but we filled it out with the logo text discussion. And then this session, I actually don't remember whether or not that hit the full half hour, but I think this 2 hour block of coding for the time being is good. Again, that will change once we get to CSS and stuff like that, because CSS is going to take me forever. CSS and page layout is going to take me forever to get done. So I may have to switch to like 4 hour sessions, not even 4 hour sessions. It may be a matter of, listen, I will get done and have this formatted, and then we'll talk about what I got done, and however long it takes is however long it takes. I may not put myself on a time limit for that one. It may just be a matter of, look, I'm going to accomplish this thing, and then we'll come back and talk about it. But for the time being, like I said, this is working out just fine. So with the start of the dramatic music in the background as our send-off, if you have been watching, thank you, and I hope you have a great and wonderful day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're at in the world, and I will catch you next time.